Yeah, it goes.
Yeah, it goes.
Okay. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. Okay, so let's get this back on here. And we're in chapter 3.
All right.
Chapter 3. So, if you remember, since we haven't met in a little while because of the holiday season, we're going through Romans. Chapter 1 started Paul's basic indictment of mankind. Chapter 1 was very broad, generalized, kind of like all of mankind, like we all. And then chapter 2 got a little bit more direct, you all. And then, that's all right. It's just a text message. I don't know who it's from. And then and then chapter 2 is more like rather than we, it's more like you. It got a little bit more poignant. And then it started talking a little bit more about the Hebrew people or the Israelite people or the Jewish people, other than Gentiles and things like that. And then we got to the 20s, basically, in chapter 3, and that's when things kind of shifted. We're starting to see a little bit more juicier stuff here. We left off, if you remember, 3:23 is one that we all know pretty well, or maybe you've heard pretty well. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That's where we left off last time. Humanity and God don't measure, success, don't measure righteousness by the same standard. You know what I mean? God looks for nothing less than perfection. Of course, God's looking for perfection. That's what He is. That's what He looks for. And without that, you fall short. Mankind, on the other hand, looks for a relational righteousness. Well, I'm better than you are because, oh my goodness, you're a train wreck. You know what I mean? Yeah, no problem there.
You really feel.
So we're relational in the fact that, based on this guy, well, I'm practically a saint,
I'll take you off my wheel.
Anyway, but that's not the truth of righteousness. We aren't the gold standard. God's the gold standard. God seeks after perfection. And it tells us that all have sinned and fall short of God's glory. So that's kind of where we start picking up when we move to verse 24, because God's glory has been imparted to us. So verse 24, we'll see if we can get through 24, 25, let's see where we can go. 25, maybe into 26, so we'll read that just so we can get going. 23 was for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. 24, being justified freely by His grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God set forth as a propitiation by His blood through faith to demonstrate His righteousness, because in His forbearance God had passed over the sins that were previously committed, to demonstrate at the present time His righteousness, that He might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. Now there's a bunch of like $5 words in there, which is awesome because we're going to talk about them, and then you'll know these cool, these cool words, and you'll be able to go, oh, well, yeah, the propitiation of things, and you'll go, people go, wow. But anyway, it's really not as cool as it sounds once you know what the definition is. So, anyway, so how do you obtain righteousness? We don't see righteousness as the same way God sees righteousness. God looks for perfection. We look for relational, quote-unquote, perfection. I'm better than this guy, or I'm better than that guy, so I obviously have got a leg up on that guy. That type of thing, but that's not the case. Comparing yourself, it's like taking dirt and comparing it to mud. It's like having dirt comparing itself to mud. Well, I may be dirt, but at least I'm not mud. You know what I mean? Well, all it takes is a little water, and you're the exact same. You're still filth. You know what I mean? God, on the other hand, the example that we used last time, I remember it now, was a high jumper. you go and you jump over high jumps, and you know, I look and I go, wow, that's really extraordinary. These guys can jump like 7 feet over this, you know, these bars, and I'm thinking, I'm not even 7 feet tall. You know, I could never do something like that. But then again, if you were to go up into an airplane and at 50,000 feet, you're looking down upon this guy jumping over this bar. It's not quite as impressive as when you're down there looking at it. And that's the perspective difference between us and God. You know what I mean? That was the example we used. I remember that. So how do we obtain righteousness? If there's no way, I'm dirt, but at least I'm not mud, I'm still not going to be clean enough to do what needs to be done. So how do we get righteousness? How does righteousness get to us? How do we achieve the righteousness that God could give to us? Because in verse 23, it just told us all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So how am I going to get that glory? Well, it has to be given to us. I mean, it has to be gifted to us. It has to be imparted to us. There's no way that we could do that. And the term that Paul uses here in verse 24 is being justified. Okay? Being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. The key word that he used there is justified. And, you know, we've looked at justified before, and it always needs a good explanation, so to speak. It is, you know, some people use that little phrase, it's just as if I've never sinned, which isn't a bad definition, I guess you could say. But think of it relationally. Think of it, you know, we talked about how Paul is giving an indictment on mankind, pleading the case that we're all guilty. All right? And we are standing before the judge, and it's now time for the decision. Okay? And I don't know if any of you have ever served on a jury. You go and you sit there, you're in the jury box, you listen to, you know, both sides tell their story, you go in a room, and you talk about it, you come back out, and you give your verdict. Okay? So basically you're at the verdict part. Okay? So if you're at the verdict, and you're standing before the judge, what's the verdict? Well, there's two different verdicts, right? Guilty and not guilty. In this case, we're going to use the idea of just or unjust. If you are just, okay, that means what? You get to go free. You don't get any punishment. Okay? If you are standing before the judge and you are determined to be just, well, you don't get anything counted against you. Okay? But if you are determined to be unjust, well then, you know, you might have fines or jail time or worse, you know, applied to you because you are determined to be unjust. In human courts, we have to establish, you know, you have to establish your innocence based off of
Evidence.
what are the things that they take against you? What are they called? Charges. Whew, wow. Sorry. You have to plead your innocence based off the charges that are against you. Well, I saw you steal something. Well, I'm innocent. Well, you have to prove, or you have to plead your case to that innocence, and it is then the human court's responsibility to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you may not have done that. Okay? That you may or may not have done that. And if they can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are unjust, well, then you're in trouble. Okay? As far as God's concerned, though, you know, all the way from chapter 1 till, you know, chapter 3 in the 20s, all Paul's been doing is saying, you're unjust. I mean, that's all he's been saying is you're guilty. Now, all this time, all he's been saying over and over and over again is you're in trouble, buddy, because you ain't going to make it. And he's been saying over and over again, nobody's going to stand before God, the ultimate judge, and be able to be judged as just. It just ain't going to happen that way. The only way that you're going to be given the title of righteous The only way you're going to be seen as being just is if someone were to give you that. If somebody were to impart that to you. If the only way you're going to get that righteousness is by some other means. Somebody has to declare you just because you're not. Okay? Someone has to come to your aid. In verse 24, it says, being justified freely, tells us that the only way that we can be determined as just or being justified by all the charges that have been brought against us all the way since chapter 1, being justified or being shown as just is given to us how? Freely. Okay? By how?
Grace.
By His grace. Through what?
Redemption.
Through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. So we are made just. How? Freely. It's a gift. Okay? That gift was given to us through His grace. And the person that gave it to us? Jesus Christ. We are redeemed back. That other, the second word there is redeemed. You're standing for the judge. Justified is very important because you're there at the sentencing part. Are you just or are you unjust? And it ain't looking good for you. Okay? But the only way that you can redeem yourself back or be brought back to a just verdict versus an unjust verdict, or a not guilty versus a guilty, is to be redeemed back. Who did that for you? Jesus Christ. How did He do that for you? He did it by His grace, and it was a free gift to us. So if you're hoping to become just versus unjust, it has to be by somebody. And it tells us right here that it's a free gift given to us by the grace of God through Jesus Christ to redeem us back, which is huge. Basically what Jesus is doing is He's putting His name on the line for you and me, okay, which is huge. You know, He's transferring His righteousness to us by putting His name on us. You know, sometimes people will say, well, you always got to be careful who you recommend. You know what I mean? You know, if somebody's wanting to get a job, you got to be careful who you recommend, because if they are terrible at that job, it's going to make you look bad too. Well, this is on such a more grander scale than you could ever imagine. This isn't about whether or not you can fold towels or sell drinks at a bar or sell food at a restaurant or package, wrap presents at, whatever the job may be. This is so far beyond that. This guy is guilty. And yet, we're being redeemed back. And yet, Jesus Christ is putting His name on the line for us to redeem us back. And He does it by His grace. Is it something that we can have? No. Is it something we can do? No. Is it something we can repay? No. But is it necessary? Well, if we want to live, you betcha. And it's the only way that we can give it. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We're guilty. Oh man, you're really guilty. Being justified, being brought back from guilty, is a free gift by His grace alone to redeem us back through Jesus Christ. That's what this verse is telling us. And it's giving us a declaration of just, not unjust. Now that word redemption is to release. The word itself in the Greek means to release from bondage through the payment of a price. Okay? Release from bondage. All of us have taken out loans, stuff like that. You know what I mean? And you pay them back every time, but you still are in bondage because of that loan. You still have that debt weighing over your head. And you're paying it off, and it's going down, I've only lived here about a year and a half, and I've been paying on my mortgage for my house, and I can look it up online, and I can see it going down and going down. But there's still a huge amount hanging over my head, one that I look at and go, I'll be paying on this for a while. It just is what it is. I'll be paying on that thing for a while. But I think of my brother, my oldest brother. He actually has paid off his house. and now he is free of that burden. You know what I mean? Like he sat there and he paid on it, he paid on it, he paid it, and now his house is paid off. You know what I mean? And you know, some people have told him, I think I have told him, hey man, why don't you sell your house and get a, you know, different house? Mine's paid off. You know, you know, what are you, dumb? Mine's paid off. You know, is what he's telling me. You know, I just released that burden. You know, and I'm still under that burden, so it, you know, it doesn't affect me as much. I don't appreciate it as much, but he's been released from that burden. So it's kind of cool like that to understand that that's a releasing of that burden. So, excuse me, all of mankind, we are unjust, but we are given a just ruling because of the redemption that's given to us through Jesus Christ. Christ paid for us in full, which is awesome. Any thoughts or comments on that particular verse? It's a little small verse, it's not super long, but there's tons of super important stuff in there. This one statement, excuse me, verse 23 and 24, in my personal opinion, is huge. Verse 23 tells you exactly where you stand in the grand scheme of things, and it ain't a good place. And 24 tells you that you have been redeemed back from that by somebody greater than yourself, the actual authority of all things, which is kind of cool. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments on that? Well, I drink my wonderful hot chocolate. They carried up. Okay. Well, then we'll move on. 25. 25 is kind of a little bit of a furtherance, I guess you could say. 25, whom God set forth, talking about Jesus Christ, of course, and the redemption that he did, whom set forth as a propitiation by his blood through faith to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance God had passed over the sins that were previously committed to demonstrate the present time his righteousness, that he might be the just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus Christ. The second part of 25 and 26 we'll talk about because they kind of go together. But we'll talk about the first part here of 26. So once again, like a couple of the key words in 24 were justified and redemption. In verse 25 we have a couple of key words as well. And it's the big, $5 word right there is propitiation, which is awesome. In the Greek, I had to write this down. Hilasterion is the Greek word. It just flows right off the tongue. It actually doesn't have. I had to look it up because it doesn't really have an English per se equivalent. Propitiation is the word that they use, but it doesn't really have a direct English translation. The Hebrew related word to that in the Old Testament is Kippur. Where do we hear that? Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur. Same thing. Okay? And that's back in Leviticus. Yom Kippur. And that's it. So I'll tell you what the Greek word means here in a minute after I explain it to you, because it's important that we understand the importance of it. Now, Yom Kippur. That is the Day of Atonement. Okay? Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. So the high priest, at the time, the high priest would go get 2 goats, and he brings both these goats before a congregation in Israel, and they cast lots, which is basically the equivalent of flipping a coin. But it's, I don't want to devalue that because it's not really flipping a coin per se. The Hebrew people would use the idea of casting lots, which was kind of like flipping a coin, to relieve themselves of the decision-making process and allow the sovereignty of God to do what it's supposed to do. Okay? So they're saying, well, I'm not going to choose one over the other. I'm going to flip a coin and God will make the outcome, whatever it is that we're going to do. All right? That's kind of a very simplistic kind of a explanation for it, but hopefully that makes sense to you. So they cast lots. And, whichever goat loses, that guy was unfortunately going to get sacrificed. So in Leviticus 16, it tells us that the priest then would offer the goat on which the lot of the Lord fell to make a sin offering. So that sin offering was made, and this is once again Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So we're making an atonement here for everybody. So the priest, he has to go get a young bull, and he has to go and he has to sacrifice it and do all of his little ceremonial cleanings and washings and stuff like that, so that he can go into the temple or the tabernacle, wherever, depending on what time of the history you are. And you would go into, he does this so that he could ceremonially clean himself, because once a year he's allowed to go into the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant is. And the Ark of the Covenant sat in there, and he would be able to go into this room just this one time a year after he does all these ceremonial cleanings. If you try and go in there another time of the year, or if you try and go in there when you haven't done all your ceremonial cleanings, it'll kill you instantly. So it's not someplace you accidentally go, is this the restroom? It doesn't work that way, because you're dead. All right? So you go in there. If you go in there, you'll see the Ark of the Covenant. And if you are picturing the Ark of the Covenant in my head like I am, you'll see that it's all gold and it's this cool little box. But on top of it, actually the picture I always picture in my head is from Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is terrible. But it's awesome. You've got the two angels on top, and on that is the Shekinah, which is the cover of the ark, and on top of the ark is the Hebrew word called the mercy seat. Okay? That's the mercy seat. And on the mercy seat, the high priest would go in. The mercy seat is where, the Lord would be, so he would go into this little room. Man, I got something in my eye. It's not working out real well for me. Anyway, so he'd go into this room, and once a year, and he would take, the blood of the goat or whatever and sprinkle it on the mercy seat. And this was the Day of Atonement and stuff like that. He'd sprinkle this blood on the sacrifice of the goat, on the kipporet, which is the Hebrew word derived from kofar, meaning the ransom or the secured favor through a gift. The kipporet means the mercy seat, or it means the covering of atonement, or it means the sanctification, or it means the appeasement, or it means the place of propitiation. Okay. The Greek translation of that is Hilaz Tyrion, and that means the mercy seat. It's for atonement. Okay? So the sacrificial rite was symbolized here by what Paul is using. Now, remember, Paul grew up and trained by one of the most predominant, Hebrew teachers there was. So he knows all this stuff. So when he uses this, $5 word, as I say it, he uses this $5 word, he's actually talking about this atonement that is going on. He uses this propitiation. He says, whom God set forth as a propitiation by his blood. Remember that goat, God chose that goat. That goat was sacrificed as a sin offering. That blood was then taken in and sacrificed to the mercy seat of God, and it was used on that Day of Atonement as the propitiation for them. It's that atonement that is being done. So, if you're looking at this verse, it says, whom God set forth as an atonement. All right, we're talking about Jesus Christ here. Jesus Christ, God set forth as an atonement by his blood. Okay. Now, we're not talking about a temporal thing. It's not a sacrifice that's done once a year. It's not about a goat or anything. It's talking about a one-time sacrifice of the blood of the ultimate sacrifice, Jesus Christ. And it's given as an atonement to that. So that propitiation, it's that big $5 word, but it has a very deep meaning. And that's the kind of history around what that is. Okay? So the actual Greek word doesn't exactly have a direct English translation, but it's derived from that Hebrew concept in that mercy seat and that atonement. Okay? Did I lose anybody on that one? Oh, I don't think so. Okay, right up. So, when Adam and Eve sinned, okay, they drew upon themselves the consequences of that sin. Verse 23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Okay? The penalty of our sin is an overwhelming debt, one in which we cannot, stand before the righteous judge, the creator and judge of all things, and be able to be found just. We are unjust. Okay? And God, up until this point, God has not been viewed as, the warm and fuzzy, flowery kind of God. He's a guy that is got wrath, righteous wrath against the unrighteousness of mankind because they chose to do their own thing. He set them up to have the best life they could ever possibly have, and they chose to do their own thing because they thought they knew better. And so God's not just a God of love, which he is, but he's also a God of that righteous wrath, and he demands justice. Okay? All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Their justice has to be done. A penalty has to be paid for sin, and that penalty is death. Not only physical death, Adam started to die, and we all die as well, but it's also spiritual death. We have that separation from God, an eternal separation from God, which is not a great place to be. And considering the fact that the only time, which is a short time that we have here on earth, to be able to plead our case to being just or unjust, that's not a lot of time, okay? Especially since the majority of our life is spent being stupid. So we have to figure out what is going to get us on the right side of this, on this ruling from the judge. So Paul declares the crucifixion of Jesus as a public sprinkling of blood, so to speak, on the Day of Atonement, which is the rite of the propitiation. That fulfills two very important things, two requirements. The atonement of Christ satisfies the wrath of God, because all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. He has wrath against the unrighteousness of man. He can't be in the presence of sin, and there is a demand for justice. You sinned, you got to pay the price. All right? So, on this Day of Atonement, we see that there's a sacrifice made of the blood that actually satisfies the wrath and also, at the same time, atones us from what's happened, before. Actually atones for us what has happened before. And we'll see in the last part of this verse, in the last part of 25 here, it says, whom God set forth as the propitiation, or as the atonement by his blood, through faith. We'll get back to that little statement right there. To determine his righteousness. He's determining his righteousness right now because he has to make sure that we are righteous. If we are righteous, we would be just, and we're not righteous. But he is showing his righteousness, or his ability to impart that to us, because in his forbearance, or in his knowledge, God had passed over the sins that were previously committed to demonstrate at the present time his righteousness, that he might be the just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus Christ. God delayed judgment. Now, throughout the Old Testament, God delayed judgment. He didn't just, you did something dumb, he didn't just boom, zap you right then. Okay? God would delay judgment. And it caused some people to suggest that, well, maybe God isn't all that good. We think of God as being the ultimate good. Well, if he's going to delay his judgment, then maybe he's not all that good. Why does he let all this suffering happen and things like that? As if God were the cause of it. You know what I mean? That's the arrogance of man. Okay? Why would God allow stuff like that to happen? Well, he's not allowing it to happen. You did it. You're the one. You're the unjust. You're the unrighteous. You're the one that is not, you're the one that's a sinner. All right? And because of that, people, think about, and that's what this part right here of this verse kind of addresses the concept. Because it says that he demonstrates his righteousness because in his in his knowledge, God had passed over the sins that were previously committed to demonstrate at the present time his righteousness. Okay? If he would have just zapped you when you sinned, you would have been dead years ago. Okay? But he didn't do that. All right? He's demonstrating his righteousness because of this propitiation, because of this atonement. Okay? And because of that, he's giving us the opportunity, all right, the opportunity to turn that unjust sentence into a just sentence. Okay? He's given us that chance. But he also tells us that it's very important that we have to do something real, real important. He tells us there that whom God set forth as a propitiation by his blood through faith. At the end of 26, he says he might be the just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. All right? So, to sum this whole thing up, the standard of righteousness has never been anything less than perfection. All right? In times past, people have said, well, why does he allow stuff like this? No. He doesn't allow anything to happen. His standard is still the same standard. He still demands perfection, even to this day. And there's no way that we can live up to that level of scrutiny. There's no way that we're going to be able to attain that level of righteousness or justness, I guess you could say. Our only hope is that someone were to step in and declare us just or declare us righteous by giving us the gift of that righteousness and giving us that that ability to be atoned or redeemed back for our sins. And that person is Jesus Christ. But it all boils down to faith. It all comes down to one simple concept. All right? Faith. All right? It tells us that he demonstrates at the present time his righteousness, that he might be the just and the justifier of those who have faith. Okay? If you understand what he's telling you in just these short verses right here, all right? I mean, even before that, in 21, he started off the whole process talking about the law and stuff like that. But in 23, 24, he says that you've sinned, you fall short of the glory of God, you're unjust. But yet, you can be made just freely as a free gift by God's grace through his Son, Jesus Christ, and be able to be redeemed back in him, because he set him up as that atonement for us through faith, to demonstrate his righteousness, to demonstrate that he could still fulfill his justness, he could still give justice to us for sinning, and yet still spare us by the blood of his Son. And it can all be done very simply through faith. That's the key. That's the crux of it. If you have a gift and it's given to you, if you don't accept it, it's worthless. I mean, if you don't, the only way you can do that is if you have faith. You have to have that faith. He's standing there doing something unprecedented. God is nothing short of perfection. He demands perfection. We are not perfection. And instead of him zapping us immediately, he held off on that justice long enough to give us his Son, to declare us righteous. But the only way that we're going to be able to do that is if we accept that gift, that free gift that's given to us through his grace. And if we don't, well, we're doomed. Because it's already been pre-written. It's already done. The wonderful thing that it tells us here in verse 25 is that in his forbearance, he knows, okay, in his forbearance or in his knowledge, he knows. He knew that you were going to be doomed. He knew that you were going to screw up. He knows that you're doomed. And yet, he still provided for you a free gift to get you, a free pass to get out. But it still costs. It costs faith. So, does anybody have any thoughts or comments on that particular thing? on that specific concept there?
Fairly short verses, but man, is it packed with.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Nuggets.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The thing that's huge about this is you're able to see mankind's state, God's divine justice that needs to be given. You get to see His love, His mercy. You get to see the plan that He had since the very beginning to atone us back or to redeem us back. You get to see how He and Christ are working hand in hand to try and do that to redeem us back. It's all given to us by a free gift, even though we screwed up and we're not going to make it, you know. And yet, it's all wrapped up in a neat little bow of faith. That one little thing, and it sounds too good to be true. The message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, is what the Bible tells us, because it sounds too good to be true. And the world tells us that so often. It's too good to be true. If it sounds too good to be true, it is too good.
Well, or that it's too hard.
Or it's too hard.
And it's so easy.
Yeah. Yeah. I
That's
mean,
it,
and believe me, nothing in these verses say that it's easy. None of it was easy for God. He was the one who made the rules, and yet figured out a way to fulfill all aspects of the rules, and yet redeem us or save us or make us just in the end to redeem us back to Him so that we can have that relationship with Him. Now that is brilliance in action. I mean, oh my goodness, that's brilliance in action.
It was so hard for God that He had to turn His head whenever Jesus hung on the cross and died.
Mm-hmm.
He made it dark to where He couldn't see Him suffer or anything like that, but He knew He was suffering anyway.
Oh yeah. And Jesus Himself, I mean, just think about it. I mean, at any point in time, He could have just said enough.
That's
You
right.
know?
He could have.
He could have easily just said enough.
But it wouldn't have been the right thing to do, because for us, you know, we would have had no hope or nothing like that.
That's right. Right. And there was even a point in time when He was like, man, if there's some other way to do this, I wish there was another way to do this, but there's not. So let's do it. You know, it's basically the conversation that He has with Himself or with God, the Father. He's like, man, I wish there was another way that this could be done, but there isn't. You know, and that's and so often in our lives I see that happen. You know, when push comes to shove, we're like, I don't know if I'm willing to pay that price, or I'm not willing to go that extra distance. But He was willing to sacrifice His very life, His existence, to redeem us. Nothing about that was super easy, but He made it easy for us in the end, which I think is so awesome. It's so amazing. And that's why, you know, when I think about the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, you know, it's so not complicated, and it's so not foolish, and it's so not complex. You know what I mean? I can sit here and I can read through these verses, and I can go through every little nuance of every little thing, and I can tell you all the richness of the text that's in there, but you don't have to. You can just literally just read it word for word, and it'll just tell you that you sin, you die. You know, you need to be just, you can't. You need to be redeemed back to God, or you're going to perish. And there's no way to do that except for God's gift, which is Jesus, through His blood. And all you need to do is, well, have faith. I mean, it's not difficult. It's not complicated. Yes, it was super complicated for Him to be able to do that and to orchestrate all this together, but He wraps it up in a nice, neat little bow for us, calling it faith. And that's what we need to have, is faith in Jesus, that He did that, you know. So, I just, the whole thing just those few verses, I really went into depth. I don't know if I talked to you as much about it as I read about it, because I went through almost every word that was in there, and it floors me, the complexity of what God did, and yet how the outcome is so wonderful, so loving, so just, and so easy for us. Like, we don't deserve that. I mean, we don't deserve it to be that easy. You know what I mean? We just don't. And yet, He loves us so much that He did that. And I think about like my boys or something. What I wouldn't do for them, what I wouldn't do to try and save them or redeem them back, and you think about God doing the very same thing, what He wouldn't do, and He sent His Son Jesus to die, and by doing that, He knew that this was the way. This is the way that I can go, and I can make sure that I fulfill all the rules, and yet spare mankind. But it has to be our choice. It has to be that faith. It's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. Any other thoughts? I'm sorry, I'm blathering on. Do you have any other thoughts or comments or anything about that?
I found on the side of my Bible, the mercy seat in the Old Testament was hidden in the Holy of Holies.
Mhm.
But God took the mercy seat, Jesus,
Yeah.
and put Him on public display.
Correct. Yeah. Well, that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
Is, I mean, what happened? I mean, the propitiation or the mercy seat was something that was very, very protected. It was only one person got to do it. Only one person got to see it. Only one person did it, and it was only a term thing. It was once a year. But this one, Paul's saying that this particular propitiation, this particular mercy seat, was put out. The shedding of blood was forever to be able to see. And that's another thing. I mean, it's, I think I talked about that at Christmas time. There's more evidence of the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ than there is about Julius Caesar even existing. And yet, you can go to the movies and see, stuff about Julius Caesar and all that stuff. But yet, somebody stands up and says, Jesus on TV, and oh my goodness, they clip them out or they edit them out because they don't like that name being used, and it's, it's kind of sad, but true.
For propitiation, I have satisfaction.
That's
I
good.
think
Yeah.
that's
Satisfaction, atonement, satisfaction. I think that's really good. Yeah, satisfaction is a good word as well. Atonement, satisfaction. Yeah. Very good. It is a fulfillment, I guess you could say. The Day of Atonement is that Yom Kippur thing. So the Kippur is that atonement that we're talking about for that mercy seat. The Hebrew equivalent to the Greek word that's used there.
Paid in full.
Paid in full. Yeah, absolutely. So, next time, I'd encourage you, next time you saw these verses, like for all of sin, we use that verse as a staple. For all of sin and fall short of the glory of God. I kind of hope that you would think about, what we talked about here today, and verses 24 and 25 about the whole propitiation, about that atonement that was given. We got that just ruling free of charge as a gift through His loving grace by way of Jesus Christ to redeem us back to Him. And that was the atonement. That was it. That was the propitiation. That was the atonement that we had. That was the payment that was required for verse 23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So, I don't know. I just hope, something to think about. If you use that, of a verse, if you ever use that verse again, you'll think about that. That, paid that, He atoned for me, right there. I sinned, I'm doomed, and yet He made me just by atoning for me right there. Cool. Any other thoughts or comments there? Okay, we'll start 27 and 28. 26, the grace, what we're going to talk about next time is grace. Okay? Grace is an unmerited favor. We're going to talk about that kind of towards the end of 20. Well, it's starting in 27, but it kind of gives us a little bit of a preview, I guess you could say. Not preview, but in 26. There's a declaration made here. Mercy is given to us, and mercy is given to us through this free gift, this unmerited favor, this grace that's been given us. And it can't be demanded, it can't be offered, it can't be reciprocated, it can only be received. And this bold declaration prompts Paul to then start kind of with three questions. He after he makes this bold statement about being made just, finding that just declaration or being declared, I guess you could say, just, and being atoned for and being redeemed back, it kind of Paul pauses and asks three questions to those who suggest maybe that there's some way that they can earn, or some way that they deserve the salvation, which they don't. So starting in verse 27, we're going to start seeing these three questions that he gives, and that's what we're going to talk about next time, is these questions. So know that this is where we ended this time. We're not going to meet for 2 weeks, because next week we're going to meet for the missionary conference. But in 2 weeks, or not 2 weeks, 4 weeks, holy cow. 4 weeks we're going to meet, and this is where we're ending, is verse 36, 3:36, and then we're going to talk about these three questions about those who may have a crazy notion that maybe they deserve this free gift. Okay. All right, that's it.
Good.
Let's pray. We'll get going here. Thank you, dear Lord, for this time that we can be here and talk about your word. And dear Lord, I hope that this word can truly stir us to the very core. That's our desire, is that we do these Bible studies and we get into your word and just really get into everything about it and the meaning behind it and the truth of it, so that it will that it'll weigh heavy on our mind, and it will stir us to the very core, that as we're going through life and we're living life and we're talking to people, that those things will truly be a guiding light to us in how we live our life and how we interact with others, and how we let them know about the truth of this life. And that's, we're guilty. We don't have anywhere to go. And yet you have made a way to declare us just, to declare us righteous, and redeem us back to you. And it's only through the blood of Jesus Christ. And it's in faith in that alone. And hopefully those things will just guide us. Such an in-depth concept, but a simple concept too. And one that can hopefully just impact the way that we interact with this world, and show them something wonderful, that free gift of God's grace through Jesus Christ. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen. All right. Hit that finished button.